Okay, so had you ever heard anything like this? I mean, going into schools to enforce immigration laws, it's pretty intense, right?
Yeah, that's definitely a headline grabber.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into this very topic.
All right, sounds interesting.
We're going to be looking at a transcript from a YouTube video by the Ring of Fire.
Okay.
They're analyzing some pretty serious statements from, well, let's just say a former official in the Trump administration. This person seems to be suggesting, or at least open to, the idea of immigration raids in schools.
Wow.
Our goal today is to break down these claims, understand the reasoning behind them and the counter-arguments presented, and explore the potential consequences. It's pretty heavy stuff.
It sounds like it. So where do we start?
Well, this video focuses on Tom Homan.
Okay.
He was a border official under President Trump, and he apparently made some pretty controversial remarks on ABC's This Week.
Oh, okay. What did he say?
He said he was definitely open to the idea of raiding public schools to apprehend undocumented children. And, listen to this, he specified all levels of schools, from elementary to high school. The title of the video itself is pretty provocative. Trump border czar threatens to raid schools to arrest students.
Okay, so right away, the language is pretty charged, right? Definitely open is a strong statement. It suggests a real willingness to consider and maybe even carry out these actions.
Exactly. And the video immediately challenges the logic behind this, pointing out what they see as some pretty glaring contradictions. For example, they bring up the image of MS-13 gang members, who are often teenagers, and they sarcastically ask if these gang members are known for making sure their members are getting a good education. They're basically saying it's absurd to think that schools are full of dangerous criminals who are undocumented immigrants.
Right, so they're questioning the very premise of this idea.
Exactly. So what reasons did Homan give for being open to such a controversial measure?
Well, good question.
According to the video, Homan argued that other law enforcement agencies aren't restricted from entering schools or places like doctor's offices or hospitals.
Okay, so I see where he's going with that.
His point is that ICE officers are also highly trained professionals and should have the same authority to determine if there's a national security or public safety threat in these sensitive locations. He suggests that making arrests should be an option if necessary, but of course with supervised review.
Supervised review, that's an interesting point. So his argument basically hinges on the idea that ICE should have the same access as other law enforcement agencies and the need to address potential threats wherever they may be, even in places like schools.
Exactly. But the video pushes back on this, arguing that schools, hospitals, and places of worship have traditionally been considered sensitive locations, where law enforcement activities are often restricted or require a higher levels of justification because of their importance to community well-being and access to essential services.
And that makes sense. It's not about treating one law enforcement agency differently from another. It's about recognizing the unique role these institutions play in our society.
Absolutely. And then the video takes on the issue of public safety in schools directly, but from a very different angle. They say the real threat in schools isn't immigrants, it's white men with guns.
Oh, wow. They go there.
They question why the focus is on immigration enforcement in schools when the real danger to students, statistically speaking, comes from gun violence. They're presenting an entirely different perspective on what constitutes the biggest threat to student safety.
Right, so they're forcing us to compare priorities. Are we focusing on the right things when it comes to keeping our kids safe in school?
That's a good question. Now, Holman did try to clarify things a bit, saying the initial focus would be on individuals who pose public safety and national security threats. He characterized this group as a smaller segment of the population. But then the video quotes him as saying that as they expand their efforts, we should expect more arrests nationwide for anyone who is in the country illegally.
So he's suggesting that while the immediate target might be limited, the scope could widen significantly over time.
Right. And the video seizes on this apparent contradiction. They point out that Holman was working for a convicted felon at the time, referring to President Trump.
Okay, so they're bringing up Homan's association with someone who has been convicted of a crime?
And they use that to question the legitimacy of his concern about others breaking the law.
It's an interesting tactic, right?
It definitely makes you think about the messenger and the message.
It does.
Now, the video goes on to explore the broader implications of this type of policy. They suggest that immigration raids could extend beyond schools to other sensitive community spaces like churches and hospitals. And they're very skeptical of the claim that only national security threats would be targeted.
I can see why they would be.
They cite a reported figure of over 1,000 arrests on a single Sunday and question how all of those people could possibly represent a national security threat. They basically call it BS and suggest the real goal is to apprehend as many people as possible, regardless of the actual danger they may or may not pose.
It's a serious accusation. They're implying a much broader agenda than what's being stated publicly.
Absolutely. And the video ends with a pretty stark prediction. They say that history will judge these actions harshly, particularly from a global perspective.
So they're saying this could have a lasting negative impact on America's image and reputation in the world.
Right. They're encouraging us to think about the long-term consequences of these actions and how they might be viewed in the future. So to sum up this deep dive, we've got two very different perspectives on this issue. One side argues that potential immigration raids are necessary to address public safety and national security threats. They say that ICE should have the same access to locations as other law enforcement agencies. The other side criticizes this stance, questioning the real motivations behind it and highlighting the potential for overreach and the negative impact on vulnerable communities. They also question the focus on immigration enforcement when there are other pressing concerns related to school safety.
And all of this leads to some really important questions.
Absolutely.
When we consider both sides of this argument, what does it tell us about our country's priorities when it comes to immigration, public safety, and the role of law enforcement? What values are we emphasizing, and what values might be getting lost in the debate? And perhaps most importantly, what will be the long-term impact of these different perspectives on the very fabric of our society? These are the questions we need to be asking ourselves.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Anytime.
And to all of you listening, keep those questions in mind as you continue to learn about and engage with this complex issue.